Good morning, folks. This is me, Phoebe, Cedar King, Sukino, and it is January 29th, 7:23, 33 a.m. It's been a minute since we've had these talks. Felt like with everything going on, it'd probably be good to try and catch up a little, maybe share my insight. As the what was my moniker before? The wisest devil or something like that. I don't know. World's kind of tough out there for a lot of people right now. It's been that way for a while, but a lot of people are understandably scared. I'd say it's kind of why everything's the way it is, but we'll get into that. One sort of thing I've been trying to do to keep myself somewhat sane is to look into various ways to keep my mind busy. But that's also my method. See, I've learned that I actually enjoy thinking about things quite a lot. The thing that used to stress me out was that I was overthinking too much, and in reality, that wasn't necessarily a problem for me. I actually rather enjoyed it. But I'm learning that now, and I'm trying to use that for my own sake. One of the things I'm learning about is a lot of the different philosophies in our history that maybe we don't necessarily think too much about, or we misinterpret a lot of their teachings and such for basically a continuation of that fear. We don't want to see the creators or anything of that nature in a positive way because it makes it harder to hate them. It makes it harder to have a clear narrative for us to understand. And one of the sort of things that I've been thinking about is how we, and I think I mean this literally as just everyone does, even me, has some kind of perspective of kind of how the world ought to be versus how it is. We all have this kind of expectation and desire for the world to be in a certain kind of way. And again, I'm included in that too. I think it's perfectly human to want something to be comfortable to our standards or what we enjoy. One of the things I think we're getting caught up in a lot is how we get caught up in those oughts. The world ought to be this. My neighbor ought to be that. And we get stuck in that to the point where we're even too afraid or we don't want to acknowledge how the world is, because if the world was the way we think it ought to be, we might have more control over it. But we do have control, no matter how little it is. Everyone has at least control of something. I challenge you guys, anyone that, any of the 4 or 5 people or whatever that end up watching this, to challenge yourself a little. To instead shift your mind about, you know, all the things that suck, all the things that we don't have control over, whether it be other people in our lives, whether it be global circumstances, being sick even, whatever it is. I challenge you guys to just for like 5 seconds to think of one thing that you do have control over, no matter how mundane it might be. Even if it's something as little as deciding whether or not to put milk in your cereal, or putting learning in a certain fighting game input, or learning how to play Spider-Man and Marvel Rivals. Whatever it might be for you, just acknowledge that. In my case, I woke up with a sore stomach, and one of the things I can do to try and help that, the thing in my control, is I can make some tea. And that is exactly what I have in my hand right now, is a little bit of lemon ginger milk tea. And I think it could help. Just try and find at least something. You know those old memes from maybe back in the day of the expectation versus reality or something? I think I think we need to kind of look at those in another light beyond just goofy, funny ha-has. I think we could actually probably utilize that kind of perspective taking on a lot of the ways that we look at things ourselves. But I already kind of, harped on about that. There's one thing at least that might be harder for other people, but I find at least relatively easier to do, that is something within my control, is to show compassion. Whether you want to interpret any of this as that, or any of my past conversations, or anyone who knows me to judge any of my actions as uncompassionate, as a perfectly valid thing. But one thing is that I at least try to show compassion where I can. I'm not perfect, God no. I make mistakes like everyone else does. And I will try my best to own up to them as best as I can. I think that's one of the things that is difficult for a lot of people, is to kind of own when they fuck up. This might be a bit of a longer one than some of my past videos. I know I've kept it usually to like 10 minutes, but maybe this will go a little bit further. Now, with compassion in mind, I know it's not an easy thing for a lot of people. A lot of people are exhausted, tired, angry, afraid, and it is not easy to show compassion, especially to people who would misjudge us or have their own expectation of how we should be, how we ought to be, rather than how we is. So it's understandable that it might be exhausting or difficult to show those kinds of feelings and to try and understand the other side, so to speak. But I'm here to kind of challenge a lot of people's sort of narrow thinking in those areas. And I am here this morning to try and continue that narrative of challenging you, the listener, the viewer, to just try to show a little compassion to even just like one person that maybe you wouldn't show it to normally. And regardless of how it's received, don't look at the results of it, but instead look at and acknowledge that you even did it. Acknowledge that you are capable of that feeling, of showing that compassion. Even just one time, that's something worth acknowledging. Even if it's tiring, even if it's stressing, and even if you can't do it, then that's fine. Like I said, a lot of shit's hard these days. One of the things that's I've been learning more about from family and friends is how different that a lot of words, how different a lot of people do things. God's words. How differently people do things now compared to how they used to. And a lot of people's responses are usually out of fear of losing that thing or losing relevance in, some kind of medium, or a fear of not being listened to or acknowledged. And maybe that's not the case for you. That's fine. That's probably a good thing. Um, One such topic, at least, that, I've been trying to research into is kind of seeing if all of the hubbub around, like, AI is as truly as bad as everyone says, and turns out not quite. It can be pretty bad, but AI itself is a tool, and the really, really, really shitty part is more people who choose to use that tool for nefarious or bad purposes. That, yeah, sure, the tool itself, it's easy to use that in that way, but it's also something that could help people as well. It, for me at least, I've been experimenting with like image generation because I've always wanted to be a something of a creator, and one of the kind of notes of the past is how it would take so much work to even just put a single mark onto paper or on a digital canvas, and I just never felt good even about the process of trying to get better, because I'd always been surrounded by so many people who had these expectations of like, oh, you're going to be an artist. Well, you need to do this, this, and this, and you need to be this kind of quality before you even think of showing your stuff. And hell, even I put on those pressures myself. I'm not going to lie. But I have to acknowledge those pressures too and acknowledge how it eventually became a thing where it just was too exhausting that I just couldn't enjoy it, and it was eating away at me. I was something that was no longer something I enjoyed. And even if it's simple, AI generation to some degree has helped me kind of at least rekindle that kind of creative spark. And, you know, for the one or two of you that is still listening, hasn't just decided to start, keyboard warrior canceling me in the comments, ignoring the entire message of what I was saying previously. Thank you for listening at least. But it's one of those things where we don't entirely fully understand the stories that are kind of pushed out. You know, drama sells. Am I right? Uh, Drama, hate, stuff gets engagement, gets all the views, the clicks, and gets that engagement going. It's easier to just kind of go along with those judgments of essentially the idea of like, oh, well, it should be this way, or we get it really honed in that we have a real good understanding of how something works without even doing our own research, just because other people told us that, oh, hey, it's this is a really bad thing. And then when you look it up yourself, you find out it's not even really it's not really even that bad of a thing necessarily. That isn't to say there aren't terrible things out there. In fact, I think a lot of people use things like AI as distraction for to not bleh, to not have your eyes on a lot more of the bigger problems and such. It's easier to point hateful fingers at anything, and especially nowadays, it's real easy to just kind of jiggle the keys in front of someone as long as those keys are on fire or making loud noises. Do those keys have controversial opinions? So, as a sort of final challenge for the non-zero viewers, listeners remaining, I know I'm challenging you so much this video. I apologize, but I think it'll help. But maybe that's just how I think things ought to be. Anyway, um, I challenge you to look for a moment where you think that you understand how things are, even if it's something you're confident in. I want you to just for 5 seconds, just ponder the possibility, the concept of being curious about why someone might think that way, or be curious for a moment of why someone might be afraid or why someone might feel hurt, rather than just kind of secure your judgment on how things ought to be. And to kind of wrap things up, I just want to say to everyone, like, stay safe out there. Like, it's tough. a lot of the things that I'm able to say from a relatively safe point where I have people who care about me and people who look out for me, and I'm grateful for that. I know not everyone has that. So please, stay safe. As safe as you can be. This is what? I don't even know what episode this is anymore. But you have a good day, good night, whenever you decide to listen to this. And stay safe.